Deep in the sterile halls of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the impossible data streaming across her monitors at 3:47 a.m. The James Webb telescope had captured something that shouldn't exist, a galaxy identical to the Milky Way down to every spiral arm, every star cluster, every cosmic dust particle. But Sarah knew this wasn't just a cosmic coincidence. 20 years ago, she'd witnessed her father's classified experiment with quantum mirrors before he vanished without a trace. Now, buried in the telescope's data, she found the same quantum signature that had haunted her nightmares. The twin galaxy wasn't just similar, it was broadcasting, a repeating signal that matched Earth's location perfectly, and according to her calculations, something had already crossed over from the mirror universe 3 days ago, something that was now moving through major cities, leaving behind a trail of people who looked exactly like themselves but weren't quite right. Sarah's hands trembled as she realized the terrifying truth. If the mirror universe was real, then everything they thought they knew about reality was wrong. But what happens when two identical worlds collide, and how do you stop an invasion that's already wearing familiar faces? The coffee in her ceramic mug had long since grown cold, forgotten amid the cascade of revelations. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up archived files that most of NASA's current staff didn't even know existed. Dr. Marcus Chen's research into quantum dimensional theory had been classified beyond top secret before his disappearance in 2003. Sarah had been only 12 then, but she remembered every detail of that last night in his home laboratory. The shimmer in the air, the way her reflection had moved independently in his quantum mirror array, her father's face, pale with terror as he screamed for her to run. Now, the same quantum frequency patterns that had emanated from those mirrors were embedded in the telescope's readings. The twin galaxy wasn't just sending a signal, it was a doorway, and based on the timestamps in the data, that doorway had been cracked open 72 hours ago. Sarah pulled up the news feeds from the past 3 days, searching for anomalies. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But when she applied the pattern recognition algorithms she'd developed for deep space analysis, the inconsistencies became glaring. In Seattle, a prominent tech CEO had returned from a business trip speaking fluent Mandarin, despite having no previous knowledge of the language. His wife reported subtle changes. He now preferred his coffee black instead of with cream, slept on the opposite side of the bed, and couldn't remember their anniversary date. In London, a renowned physicist had submitted a paper to the Royal Society that contained theories about parallel dimensions that wouldn't be developed for another decade. When questioned, she claimed the work was entirely her own, though her research assistant insisted she'd never shown interest in quantum mechanics before her recent vacation. The pattern repeated across major metropolitan areas. People returning from trips, coming back to work after sick days, or simply claiming they'd been home all along, but wrong, subtly, terrifyingly wrong. Sarah's secure phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Director Walsh's extension. She hesitated, knowing that once she reported this discovery, her life would change forever. The Webb telescope data was automatically backed up to multiple servers. There was no putting this particular genie back in the bottle. "Chen, here," she answered. "Sarah, I need you to stop whatever you're working on and report to Conference Room Alpha immediately." Director Walsh's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "Sir, I think there's something you need to see." "I know what you've found, Dr. Chen. We've been monitoring your access to the classified Chen archives. How long have you known about your father's work?" The blood drained from her face. "You've been watching me. Your father's research was buried for a reason. Some doors should never be opened, but it appears someone or something has found another key." Through her office window, Sarah could see the pre-dawn darkness beginning to lighten. Somewhere out there, people were waking up next to spouses who weren't quite their spouses. Children were having breakfast with parents who had forgotten their favorite cereals. The invasion wasn't coming. It was already here, wearing the faces of everyone they loved. Director, the quantum signatures indicate the dimensional barrier is destabilizing. If we don't act soon, conference room Alpha, 5 minutes. And Dr. Chen, bring everything you've found, all of it. The line went dead. Sarah saved her work to 3 separate encrypted drives, her mind racing through the implications. If Director Walsh knew about her father's research, that meant NASA had been tracking dimensional anomalies for decades, which raised the terrifying question, how long had they known this day would come? She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, not knowing she was being watched by security cameras operated by someone who had been Director Walsh until 3 days ago. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Sarah Chen barely noticed as she stared at the data streaming across her monitors. The initial euphoria of discovering the mirror galaxy had faded into something darker, a gnawing certainty that they were missing something crucial. Still here, Sarah? Dr. Marcus Webb peered over her shoulder, his reflection ghost-like in the screen. The observatory had emptied as midnight approached, leaving only the hum of cooling systems and the distant whisper of the telescope's mechanical adjustments. Look at this! Sarah pulled up the spectral analysis, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The light signature from Galaxy M47 isn't just identical to ours, it's synchronized. Every stellar formation, every supernova, every planetary alignment is happening in perfect parallel. Marcus frowned, adjusting his glasses. That's impossible. Even if it were a true mirror universe, there should be some temporal drift, some variation in... Exactly. Sarah's voice carried an edge of excitement mixed with dread. But watch this. She overlaid the timelines, the data points cascading like digital rain. Every major cosmic event in our galaxy has a corresponding event in M-47, occurring within nanoseconds of each other. It's as if they're quantum entangled. Marcus completed her thought, his face paling. An entire galaxy. Sarah nodded grimly. And that's not the strangest part. She switched to a different data set, one that had been troubling her since the afternoon. 3 days ago, we detected what appeared to be a minor gravitational anomaly near Alpha Centauri. Nothing significant, barely registered on our instruments. The display showed a subtle distortion in space-time, like a ripple across still water. Marcus leaned closer, studying the readings. Solar wind variance? That's what I thought initially. But then I cross-referenced it with M47. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she brought up the comparative analysis. The exact same anomaly appeared in their Alpha Centauri system, but 12 hours earlier. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft whir of hard drives processing the implications. Marcus straightened slowly, his scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before him. You're suggesting that events in M-47 are preceding events in our galaxy by exactly 12 hours? Not suggesting, stating. Sarah pulled up a dozen more examples, each one showing the same pattern. Stellar fluctuations, asteroid impacts, even the formation of new planetary rings, all occurring first in M-47, then mirrored in their own galaxy precisely 12 hours later. My God! Marcus sank into the chair beside her. If that's true, then M-47 isn't just a mirror, it's a preview, a 12-hour glimpse into our own future. Sarah's stomach clenched. Or we're a 12-hour delay of their past. The question is, what does that make us, the original or the copy? Before Marcus could answer, Sarah's secure communication console chimed with an encrypted message. The sender ID made her blood run cold. Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of the Deep Space Monitoring Division. Elena never contacted field researchers directly unless something was catastrophically wrong. Sarah's fingers hesitated over the decryption key. Elena's calling an emergency meeting. All senior staff. Midnight priority. That's impossible. Elena's been in Washington all week for the budget hearings. Sarah felt a chill creep up her spine as she opened the message. The text was brief, clinical, and terrifying. Immediate containment protocol required. Multiple reality breaches detected. Trust no one who claims to remember yesterday differently than you do. The mirror is cracking. Ev. Marcus read over her shoulder, his breathing shallow. Sarah, I spoke to Elena this morning about routine scheduling. She seemed completely normal. When this morning, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Around 9, just after the morning briefing, Sarah's hands flew over the keyboard, accessing the facility's communication logs. Her heart hammered as the records populated. According to the system, Dr. Elena Vasquez had not been in contact with anyone at the facility for over 72 hours. The last logged communication showed her boarding a flight to Washington 3 days ago. Marcus, there's no record of your conversation with Elena. That's impossible. I remember it clearly. We discussed the telescope calibration schedules for next week, and she mentioned her concern about the budget cuts affecting our... What budget cuts? Sarah turned to face him, studying his expression with new scrutiny. Elena told us last month that our funding was secure through the next fiscal year. Marcus blinked, confusion clouding his features. That's not... I distinctly remember... Sarah's mouth went dry as she watched her colleague's face transform with dawning horror. Either Marcus was lying, or something was fundamentally wrong with reality itself. Given what they'd discovered about M47, she was beginning to suspect the latter. And if Elena was right about reality breaches, then something from their mirror universe wasn't just watching them anymore. It was already here. Dr. Sarah Chen's coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed as she stared at the cascade of data streaming across her monitors. The James Webb Space Telescope had been feeding her team information about the Mirror Galaxy for 3 days straight, and each new piece of data only deepened the mystery. Sarah, you need to see this. Marcus Rodriguez, her lead data analyst, appeared at her shoulder with a tablet clutched in his hands. His usually steady voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. She looked up from the spectral analysis she'd been reviewing for the dozenth time. What is it? The signal pattern from the Mirror Galaxy. I've been running it through every decryption algorithm we have. It's not random. It's definitely artificial and... He paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. It's getting stronger. Sarah took the tablet and examined the waveform display. The signal appeared as a complex series of pulses and pauses, repeating in what seemed like an increasingly urgent rhythm. How much stronger? 40% increase in amplitude over the past 12 hours. But that's not the weird part. Marcus pulled up another screen showing a 3-dimensional map of local space. I've been cross-referencing the signal timing with gravitational wave detectors, and there are anomalies. Micro-distortions in space-time that shouldn't exist. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she studied the data. The distortions formed a pattern, almost like breadcrumbs leading from the edge of the solar system toward Earth. When did these start appearing? That's what's keeping me awake, Marcus said. The first one was detected 6 months ago, right around the time you first hypothesized about mirror universes in your paper. But we dismissed it as instrument error. Sarah's mind raced. Her theoretical work on parallel universes had been purely academic, complex mathematical models exploring the possibility of mirror realities existing in quantum superposition with our own. She'd never imagined it could be real, let alone that contact might be possible. "Pull up the deep space monitoring feeds," she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "If something's been traveling along these distortion points..." The wall-mounted displays flickered to life, showing feeds from telescopes around the globe. Sarah programmed a search algorithm to look for any objects moving along the trajectory indicated by the gravitational anomalies. For several minutes, they found nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then Marcus inhaled sharply. There, Sector 7G. Sarah magnified the image until a small, dark object became visible against the star field. It wasn't reflecting light like a typical asteroid or comet. Instead, it seemed to absorb illumination from nearby stars, creating a void-like silhouette. Run a trajectory analysis, Sarah ordered, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The computer calculated the object's path in seconds. It was heading directly for Earth, and at its current velocity it would arrive within 72 hours. "We need to alert Director Harrison," Marcus said, reaching for his phone. "Wait." Sarah grabbed his arm. Something about this felt wrong, like they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. "Before we sound the alarm, help me understand something. Why would our mirror universe send us a warning about an object that was already en route? The timing doesn't make sense unless—" She trailed off as a horrifying possibility occurred to her. Pulling up her original theoretical models, she began running new calculations, factoring in the signal strength and the object's trajectory. "Unless what?" Marcus prompted. "Unless the warning isn't about that object," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if something already made it through? What if that thing out there is just the advance scout?" Marcus leaned over her shoulder as she worked. "You're suggesting multiple incursions." "I'm suggesting we've been looking at this backwards." Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up atmospheric readings, seismic data, and electromagnetic anomalies from the past 6 months. "We assumed the mirror galaxy was warning us about a future threat, but what if they're warning us about something that's already here?" The pattern that emerged from the data made Sarah's blood run cold. Subtle atmospheric disturbances over major population centers, unexplained electromagnetic pulses near military installations, minor seismic events that didn't match known fault lines. Each incident had been dismissed individually as within normal parameters, but together they painted a picture of systematic reconnaissance. "Sarah," Marcus said slowly, "if you're right, then whatever's coming in 3 days isn't an invasion. It's an extraction." She nodded grimly. "And our mirror universe counterparts are trying to tell us we're running out of time to stop it." The warning signal from the mirror galaxy pulsed again on their monitors, its urgency now unmistakable. Sarah realized they were no longer just observing a cosmic mystery. They were participants in what might be humanity's final 72 hours. The question was whether they could decode their mirror selves' message in time to prevent whatever catastrophe was already in motion. Dr. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she pulled up the comparative analysis on her secured workstation. The basement laboratory of the Goddard Space Flight Center hummed with the white noise of cooling systems, but the sound felt different now, more ominous, like the breathing of some sleeping beast. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread that made her stomach clench. The data didn't lie. It never did. On her primary monitor, the infrared signature of the mirror galaxy pulsed with rhythmic precision. Every 4.7 seconds, a burst of organized electromagnetic radiation emanated from what corresponded to Earth's exact position in the twin system. Sarah had run the pattern through every cryptographic algorithm NASA possessed, and the results chilled her to the bone. It was a countdown. Her secure phone buzzed. Director Martinez's name flashed on the screen. "Chen, tell me you have good news." "Sir, I need you to see this in person, and we need to contact Dr. Reeves immediately." "Reeves? The quantum physicist?" "Sarah, what aren't you telling me?" She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. "The signal isn't random. It's decreasing in intervals, mathematical precision. If my calculations are correct, it reaches 0 in 72 hours. The line went silent for so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't talk to anyone else about this." The connection ended, leaving Sarah alone with the pulsing display. She pulled up the secondary analysis she'd been afraid to show Martinez, the one that made her question her own sanity. The electromagnetic signature wasn't just organized, it was responding to their observations. Every time the James Webb telescope adjusted its focus on the mirror galaxy, the signal changed frequency slightly, as if acknowledging that it was being watched. As if it knew they were there. A soft chime from her workstation made her jump. New data was streaming in from the telescope's latest sweep. Sarah's breath caught as she processed what she was seeing. The mirror galaxy had moved. Not the slow, predictable rotation of stellar bodies, but an actual displacement, minute but measurable. It was getting closer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing the movement with gravitational models. The mathematics were impossible. No known force could move an entire galaxy with such precision and speed. Unless... Dr. Chen? She spun around to find a man in a dark suit standing behind her. She hadn't heard him enter, hadn't heard the security door's distinctive beep. Her badge reader showed no record of entry in the past hour. "I'm Agent Morrison, NASA Security. Director Martinez sent me to escort you to a secure briefing room." Something was wrong. Sarah had worked at Goddard for 8 years and knew every security officer by sight. She'd never seen this man before. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and when he smiled, she noticed his teeth were too perfect, too uniform. "I'll wait for Director Martinez," she said, her hand moving instinctively toward the emergency alert button beneath her desk. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. The director has been detained on urgent business. National security protocols are now in effect." Morrison stepped closer, and Sarah caught something odd about his reflection in her monitor screen. The image seemed to flicker, like a bad video connection. When she looked directly at him, he appeared solid and normal, but the reflection showed something else, something that made her skin crawl. "Who are you?" she whispered. His smile widened, and for a split second his face seemed to shift, features rearranging themselves like pixels on a corrupted display. "Someone who appreciates your work, Dr. Chen. You've been very helpful in establishing the connection." "What connection?" "Between here and there, between what is and what could be. You've opened a door that's been closed for a very long time." Sarah's hand found the emergency button and pressed it hard. Alarms should have sounded throughout the building. Security should have flooded the basement level. Instead, silence stretched between them like a held breath. Morrison glanced at the pulsing display, and his expression grew almost fond. 71 hours and 37 minutes remaining. I do hope you'll live to see what happens when it reaches zero." The lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, Sarah heard the sound of her workstation powering down. When the emergency lighting kicked in, Morrison was gone. No footsteps, no door opening, just empty space where he had stood. Her computer screen showed only static. Sarah grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed Martinez's direct line. It rang once before connecting to a number that was no longer in service. She tried again, then attempted to call the main security desk. Every number led to the same electronic void. In the distance, she could hear the building's ventilation system cycling, the elevators running their normal patterns. Life continued above her, oblivious to the fact that something fundamental had changed. Something that shouldn't exist was walking the halls of NASA, and the countdown in the mirror galaxy continued its relentless march toward zero. The elevator descended 40 feet below NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, past levels that didn't appear on any building schematic. Sarah's security badge, hastily upgraded with clearances she'd never seen before, granted access to corridors that hummed with a different energy than the research floors above. The fluorescent lights here cast sharper shadows, and the air tasted metallic. Marcus walked beside her in uncharacteristic silence, his usual stream of observations reduced to nervous glances at the unmarked doors they passed. Behind them, Dr. Elizabeth Vance moved with the fluid confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The woman's earlier revelation about the mirror galaxy had shattered Sarah's understanding of their discovery, but she suspected they'd barely scratched the surface. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked, as they turned down another corridor lined with blast doors. "Officially, 3 days. Unofficially." Vance's smile held no warmth. "We've been monitoring anomalous signals for months. Your discovery simply confirmed what we'd already suspected." They stopped at a door marked only with a series of numbers. Vance pressed her palm against a scanner that bathed the corridor in red light for several seconds before clicking open with a heavy mechanical sound. Beyond lay a control room that made mission control look primitive by comparison. Banks of quantum processors lined the walls, their cooling systems creating a constant low whistle. Holographic displays showed data streams Sarah didn't recognize, though the mathematical structures felt eerily familiar. At least a dozen technicians worked at stations that seemed to bend light around their edges, creating distortion fields that hurt to look at directly. "Welcome to Project Looking Glass," Vance announced, "where we study reflections that shouldn't exist." Sarah moved toward the central display, where a three-dimensional map rotated slowly in mid-air. It showed two galaxies, theirs and its mirror, connected by streams of data that pulsed like a heartbeat. But the pattern was wrong. While their galaxy showed normal electromagnetic signatures, the mirror version displayed energy readings that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "The signals aren't random," Marcus whispered, his face pale as he studied the readouts. "They're responding to us. Every time we scan a specific sector, the mirror version changes its output." "Responsive communication across parallel dimensions," Vance confirmed. "Except the responses started arriving before we sent the queries, sometimes hours before, sometimes days." Sarah felt the familiar chill that came with discoveries that redefined reality. That's impossible. Even if faster-than-light communication existed, causality has been temporarily suspended, finished a new voice. Dr. James Morrison emerged from behind one of the processor banks, looking as if he'd aged a decade since their morning briefing. "The equations work, Sarah, all of them, but they work in ways that suggest our universe is fundamentally different than we thought." Morrison approached the central display and gestured at the data streams. "We're not just looking at a mirror galaxy. We're looking at the universe we would have become if certain quantum events had resolved differently. The signals aren't warnings, they're instructions. A guide for avoiding their fate." "What fate?" Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. The holographic display shifted, zooming into a sector of the mirror galaxy that should have corresponded to their local stellar neighborhood. Where Earth's sun should have been, space showed only an expanding cloud of exotic matter that seemed to devour the surrounding star systems with methodical precision. "Total dimensional collapse," Morrison explained. "Their reality began unraveling approximately 47 years ago, local time. The process accelerates exponentially. Based on their mathematical models, they have perhaps 6 months before complete universal dissolution." Marcus stepped closer to the display, his hands shaking as he manipulated the controls. "But if they're our mirror universe, why haven't we experienced the same collapse?" "Because something different happened here," Vance said quietly. "Some decision, some event, some quantum fluctuation that prevented the cascade. They're trying to tell us what that difference was, and how to protect it." Sarah stared at the dying mirror galaxy, watching civilizations that might once have been human sending their final messages across the dimensional divide. "How do we know this isn't a trap? How do we know they're not trying to trigger the same collapse here?" "We don't," Morrison admitted. "But 3 days ago, our quantum sensors detected the first microfractures in local space-time. The same signatures their models predict. Whatever protected us before, it's failing." The control room fell silent except for the whisper of cooling systems and the soft beeping of monitors recording data from a universe that shouldn't exist. Sarah found herself thinking about the Hubble image that had started this nightmare, how the twin galaxy had seemed beautiful in its perfection. Now she understood they'd been looking at a funeral portrait. "There's something else," Vance said, her voice carrying a weight that suggested the worst revelations were yet to come. "The signals aren't just coming from the mirror galaxy. We're detecting similar patterns here, embedded in what appears to be normal background radiation, as if something from their universe has already crossed over." The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Sarah barely noticed as she stared at the quantum signature analysis scrolling across her monitor. The numbers didn't lie, even when they defied everything she thought she understood about physics. The signal wasn't just coming from the mirror galaxy, it was resonating through dimensional barriers that theoretically shouldn't exist. "Still here, Chen?" Marcus Webb's voice cut through her concentration. The deputy director stood in the doorway, his usually pristine suit wrinkled from what she assumed was an equally sleepless night. "The resonance patterns," Sarah said without looking up. "They're not random. There's a mathematical progression hidden in the quantum fluctuations." She highlighted a section of data that had taken her 3 hours to isolate. "It's almost like coordinates," Marcus finished, moving closer to her workstation. "I've been running similar analyses in the secure lab. Sarah, we need to talk, away from here." Something in his tone made her finally look up. The easy confidence that usually defined Marcus was gone, replaced by something she'd never seen before: fear. 20 minutes later, they sat in his car in an empty parking garage downtown, the engine running to power his encrypted tablet. The precautions felt excessive, until Marcus showed her what he'd discovered. "The quantum signatures aren't just coming from space," he said, pulling up a map dotted with red indicators. "We've detected similar resonance patterns at 17 locations across North America in the past 72 hours. Sarah's blood chilled as she recognized some of the locations. "That's JPL and Houston. You're saying this quantum signature is already here?" "Not just here. Active." Marcus zoomed in on one of the indicators. "This is from a research facility in Colorado. 3 days ago, they detected an anomalous energy reading in their particle accelerator. Yesterday, 2 of their physicists went missing." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You think something came through from the mirror universe?" "I think something's been coming through for longer than we realized, and now it's accelerating." Marcus swiped to another file, revealing what looked like personnel records. "I've been quietly investigating unusual incidents at various research facilities over the past 6 months. Disappearances, equipment malfunctions, researchers reporting impossible experimental results before vanishing." Sarah studied the photos of missing scientists, her mind racing. But why? What would beings from a mirror universe want with our physicists? Maybe they're not beings at all. Marcus pulled up another display, this one showing brain scan imagery. What if consciousness itself can cross dimensional barriers? What if we're not dealing with visitors, but with something taking over our people? The thought was more terrifying than any alien invasion scenario. Sarah remembered her strange episode in the observatory, the feeling of being watched, the momentary disorientation. "Marcus, I think I've been experiencing something. Memory gaps, strange sensations when I'm analyzing the data." "Sarah, stop." Marcus gripped her arm, his eyes wide. "Don't say anything else. Not here, not anywhere that might be monitored." He glanced around the empty garage as if shadows might be listening. "There are protocols for this kind of situation, protocols most people don't know exist." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus's encrypted phone buzzed with an urgent message. His face went pale as he read it. "What is it?" "Houston, they just detected a massive quantum resonance event, and Sarah..." He showed her the screen. "3 more researchers are missing, including Dr. Patricia Reeves." Sarah's heart sank. Patricia had been her mentor in graduate school, one of the most brilliant minds in astrophysics. "We have to do something. We can't just let this continue." "We are doing something." Marcus started the car, his movements sharp with purpose. "There's a facility you don't know about, a place where the government has been preparing for scenarios like this since the 1960s. But Sarah, once I take you there, there's no going back. Your old life, your normal research, it's over." As they drove through the city streets, Sarah watched normal people going about their daily lives, completely unaware that reality itself might be under siege. Children played in parks while their parents checked phones, traffic flowed in predictable patterns. The sun shone through scattered clouds. Everything looked exactly as it should. But now she understood that appearances meant nothing. "The signal we detected," she said suddenly. "You said it was a warning. What if it wasn't meant for us? What if our mirror selves were trying to warn someone else about us?" Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of. What if we're not the victims in this scenario? What if we're the invasion force and we don't even know it?" The question hung in the air between them as they drove toward answers that Sarah was no longer certain she wanted to find. Behind them, the city continued its normal rhythm, but ahead lay a world where nothing would ever be normal again. The quantum resonance readings spiked again as Sarah stood in the JWST control room at 3 in the morning, her coffee long cold beside stacks of printouts that defied every law of physics she'd spent her career studying. The Mirror Galaxy, officially designated NGC Mirror by the team, though Sarah had taken to calling it Echo in her private notes, was becoming more active by the hour. The pattern recognition algorithm found something, Marcus said, materializing beside her like a ghost. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept either. "You're not going to like it." Sarah pulled up the holographic display showing the latest spectral analysis. The warning signal they'd detected wasn't random. It was structured, mathematical, almost like a countdown. The intervals between pulses were decreasing in a Fibonacci sequence, but reversed, as if time itself was running backward in the mirror universe. "How long until it reaches 0? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. 47 hours, 12 minutes. Marcus highlighted the progression on the display. "But Sarah, there's something else. The signal isn't just coming from their version of Earth anymore. It's coming from multiple star systems across their entire galaxy. Whatever they're warning us about, it's spreading." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she processed the implications. In the mirror universe, the crisis wasn't localized, it was galactic. And if their theory about quantum entanglement between the two realities was correct, then whatever was happening there would manifest here as well. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves burst through the security doors, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "We have a situation. The electromagnetic anomalies aren't limited to deep space anymore. NORAD is tracking identical distortions in near-Earth orbit, appearing in perfect synchronization with the mirror galaxy's pulses." Sarah's tablet chimed with an urgent message from the Arecibo replacement facility in Puerto Rico. Radio telescopes worldwide were detecting something impossible, signals that appeared to be originating from within our own solar system, but broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist according to known physics. "Show me the coordinates," Sarah demanded. The holographic map shifted to display our solar system, with red markers indicating the source points of the anomalous transmissions. Sarah's breath caught. The signals were coming from positions that corresponded exactly to where planets would be if our solar system were mirrored, but those positions were empty space. "It's like something invisible is occupying the mirror coordinates," Marcus whispered. "Objects from their universe existing in our space, but not quite in phase with our reality." Before Sarah could respond, every screen in the control room flickered simultaneously. For a split second, the images doubled, showing two versions of the same data overlapping like a double exposure. Then the screens cleared, but the readings had changed. The countdown had accelerated. Agent David Park's voice crackled through Sarah's secure communicator. "Dr. Chen, we need you at the Pentagon immediately. We have a code black situation." "What's code black?" Sarah asked, but she was already grabbing her jacket. "It means we're no longer just dealing with signals from space," Park replied grimly. "We have physical manifestations, unexplained phenomena occurring at 17 different locations worldwide, all corresponding to the coordinates where major observatories detected the mirror signals." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. The barrier between the universes was breaking down. The warning from their mirror selves wasn't about some distant threat. It was about an imminent collapse of the quantum boundaries that kept the realities separate. "Marcus, keep monitoring the countdown. If the pattern holds, we should see another acceleration in approximately 6 hours. And Elizabeth," Sarah turned to the senior scientist, "I need you to run a simulation. If the quantum barriers fail completely, what happens to matter from both universes occupying the same space?" Elizabeth's face went pale. Catastrophic mutual annihilation. The energy release would make a supernova look like a firecracker. As Sarah hurried toward the exit, her satellite phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister's number in Portland, but when she answered, the voice that spoke was her own. Sarah, can you hear me? This is... Static overwhelmed the connection, then cleared momentarily. Emergency Protocol 7. The convergence is happening faster than we calculated. You have to stop the Washington experiment before... The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her hands trembling. Her mirror self had just called her from a parallel universe where everything had gone wrong. The Washington experiment. What was her other self referring to? Sarah had no knowledge of any classified experiments in Washington, but clearly her doppelganger was trying to prevent the same catastrophe that had apparently already begun in a mirror universe. As she stepped into the government sedan waiting outside, Sarah realized they weren't just racing against time to understand the phenomenon. They were racing to prevent their universe from suffering the same fate that was destroying its mirror twin. And somewhere in Washington, an experiment she knew nothing about was apparently the key to either salvation or annihilation. The countdown continued, invisible but inexorable, ticking toward zero. The quantum resonance chamber hummed with an energy that made Sarah's teeth ache. She stood before the massive cylindrical structure, its surface covered in sensors and electromagnetic field generators that NASA had constructed in record time. Inside the chamber, suspended in a web of magnetic fields, floated the artifact they'd recovered from the Mariana Trench, a perfect black sphere that seemed to absorb light itself. "Readings are off the charts," Marcus called from the control booth, his voice crackling through the intercom. "The quantum field fluctuations are unlike anything we've ever recorded." Sarah pressed her palm against the observation window, watching the sphere rotate slowly in its magnetic prison. 3 days had passed since they'd brought it up from the depths, and every test had only deepened the mystery. The object defied conventional physics. Its mass seemed to shift depending on how they measured it, and spectral analysis showed elements that shouldn't exist in nature. "Sarah." Director Harrison's voice behind her carried a tension she'd never heard before. She turned to see him approaching with a tablet in hand, his face pale. "We need to talk." She followed him to the secure briefing room adjacent to the lab. Harrison sealed the door and activated the electromagnetic shielding that would prevent any surveillance. "The signal from the mirror galaxy," he began without preamble. "We've been working around the clock to decode it. What we found..." He paused, rubbing his temples. "It's not just a warning, Sarah. It's a historical record." He handed her the tablet. The screen displayed a complex waveform pattern alongside columns of translated text. Sarah's eyes widened as she read. "They're describing their own first contact with these spheres," she whispered. "This happened to them before. 57 years ago, according to their timeline. The spheres appeared in their ocean depths first, then began manifesting in population centers. Each one was a scout, a probe from something they call the Devourers." Sarah's blood ran cold. Devourers? Entities from between dimensions. They consume quantum information, the fundamental data that makes up reality itself. Once they establish a foothold in a universe, they begin the harvesting process. The tablet slipped from Sarah's hands as the implications hit her. How many spheres did they find? Initially, 12. But Sarah, that was just the beginning. The spheres replicate. They use absorbed quantum information to create copies of themselves, spreading like a virus through space-time. A klaxon suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor as they rushed back toward the observation deck. Through the reinforced windows, Sarah could see technicians frantically working at their stations, while Marcus coordinated the response. "What's happening?" Harrison demanded. "The sphere's quantum signature just spiked," Marcus reported, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's drawing energy from the magnetic containment field and somehow amplifying it." On the monitors, Sarah watched in horror as the black sphere began to pulse with an internal light. The magnetic field generators sparked and overloaded one by one, their protective barrier failing. "Evacuate the chamber," she shouted, but it was too late. The sphere dropped to the chamber floor with a resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through dimensions. Where it touched the metal surface, reality itself began to warp. The floor didn't melt or break. It simply ceased to exist, replaced by a spreading void of absolute nothingness. "It's consuming the quantum substrate," Sarah breathed, understanding flooding through her. "It's not just studying our reality, it's digesting it." The void expanded outward in perfect concentric circles, erasing everything it touched from existence. Equipment, walls, even the air itself vanished without a trace. But worse than the destruction was what emerged from the growing hole in reality. Tendrils of impossible darkness writhed up from the breach, moving with predatory intelligence. They reached toward the observation windows with hungry purpose, and Sarah could feel them probing at the edges of her consciousness. "The facility's quantum shielding is failing," Marcus reported, his voice tight with panic. "If those things breach containment, they'll have a direct pathway into our reality," Sarah finished. She grabbed the emergency communicator from the wall. "All stations, this is Dr. Chen. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. Full quantum isolation of the complex." Harrison stared at her in shock. "Protocol 7 will trap everyone inside. Will be cut off from the outside world. Better trapped than devoured." Sarah watched as blast shields began descending throughout the facility, sealing them in. "We need time to understand what we're dealing with." The tendrils pressed against the observation window, leaving no mark, but somehow Sarah could feel them testing the barrier's strength. In their writhing movement, she glimpsed flashes of impossible geometries, spaces that folded in on themselves, angles that shouldn't exist. "The signal from the mirror galaxy," she said suddenly. There was more to it, wasn't there? More than just a warning. Harrison nodded grimly. "Instructions, a way to fight back." "But Sarah, what they're asking us to do..." He paused as another section of the chamber floor vanished into nothingness. "It might destroy us as surely as the Devourers will." The facility shuddered as quantum forces beyond human understanding pressed against their defenses. In the distance, alarms echoed through corridors that might already be ceasing to exist. The concrete beneath Sarah's feet vibrated with each thunderous impact above. Dust rained down from the ceiling of the abandoned subway tunnel as she and Marcus pressed deeper into the darkness, their flashlights cutting weak paths through the gloom. "How much further?" Marcus whispered, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. Sarah checked the modified quantum detector in her hand. The device, hastily assembled from components salvaged from her lab, pulsed with an angry red glow. "The readings are getting stronger. Whatever's down here, it's big." They'd been tracking the quantum signature for 3 hours, following it from the wreckage of NASA's Houston facility through storm drains and maintenance tunnels. Above them, the entity that wore Director Harrison's face was systematically destroying everything Sarah had worked for. But down here in the forgotten arteries of the city, they'd found something else entirely. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that had once been a subway station. Sarah's flashlight swept across crumbling tilework and rusted turnstiles, but it was what lay beyond that made her blood freeze. In the center of the abandoned platform stood a structure that defied every law of physics she understood. It was a sphere, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, but its surface seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Where her eyes tried to focus on its edges, the geometry twisted away, folding back on itself in patterns that made her head ache. The air around it shimmered with heat distortion, despite the chill of the underground space. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed. "What is that thing?" Sarah's detector was screaming now, its readings off the charts. "It's a quantum anchor, a bridge between our universe and theirs." She moved closer, despite every instinct telling her to run. This is how they're crossing over. The sphere pulsed, and for a moment Sarah could see through it, not into the chamber beyond, but into somewhere else entirely. She glimpsed a mirror image of the abandoned station, but this one was pristine, filled with beings that looked human but moved with predatory grace. Their eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably alien, cold and calculating. One of them turned toward the sphere, and Sarah realized with horror that it was looking directly at her. Its face was her own, but wrong somehow, the features sharper, the expression devoid of warmth. "Mirror," Sarah smiled, and it was like staring into the face of a beautiful predator. "They're watching us," Sarah whispered, stepping back. The mirror version of herself pressed its hand against the sphere from the other side. The surface rippled like water, and Sarah felt a pull, not physical but something deeper, as if the very atoms of her being were being drawn toward their counterparts. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Sarah, don't!" But it was too late. The sphere erupted with light, and suddenly the mirror Sarah was stepping through, her form solidifying in their reality. She looked exactly like Sarah, down to the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident, but her eyes held depths of cruelty that made Sarah's stomach turn. "Dr. Sarah Chen," the duplicate said, her voice identical but somehow hollow. "How convenient. I was hoping we'd meet." "What do you want?" Sarah demanded, raising the detector like a weapon, though she knew it was useless. "What we've always wanted. Survival." Mirror Sarah circled them slowly, her movements too fluid, too perfect. "Our universe is dying, consumed by dark energy at an accelerating rate. When we discovered the quantum bridge between realities, we realized we had a choice, extinction or exodus." "So you're invading," Marcus said. "We're relocating." The duplicate's smile was razor-sharp. "Your reality is stable, abundant. All we have to do is remove the current occupants." More figures were emerging from the sphere now, twisted versions of people Sarah recognized. Mirror Harrison, his face bearing the same cruel perfection as the entity above. Mirror Martinez from her research team, his kind eyes replaced with predatory calculation. "The signals," Sarah realized, "the warning we detected from your galaxy, weren't from us," Mirror Sarah confirmed. "Your alternate selves tried to warn you when they discovered our plans. Admirable, really, though ultimately futile." Sarah's mind raced. If their counterparts had tried to send a warning, maybe there was still hope. "How many of you have crossed over?" "Enough." Mirror Sarah gestured to the sphere. "This is just one anchor point. We've established dozens across your planet, each one allowing more of us to transition. Within weeks, we'll have replaced your world's entire leadership structure." The quantum detector in Sarah's hand began to emit a different tone, not the angry warning it had been broadcasting, but something rhythmic, almost musical. Sarah looked down at it in confusion, then felt her heart leap. The pattern matched the original signal from the twin galaxy. Her counterparts were still trying to help. Mirror Sarah's expression darkened as she noticed the change. "Clever. But even your alternate selves can't stop what's already begun." The sphere pulsed again, and Sarah saw more figures gathering on the other side, preparing to cross. An army of perfect duplicates, ready to replace humanity one person at a time. She grabbed Marcus's hand and backed toward the tunnel entrance. "We have to warn someone. Tell the world what's happening." But even as she spoke, Sarah wondered who they could trust. How many people had already been replaced? How could anyone tell the difference? The invasion had already begun. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath Lower Manhattan stretched into darkness, its walls slick with decades of moisture and neglect. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the gloom as she followed Marcus deeper into the forgotten infrastructure. Their footsteps echoed off the curved ceiling, mixing with the distant rumble of active trains on parallel lines. The electromagnetic readings spiked dramatically up ahead, Marcus whispered, consulting his modified tablet. "Whatever's down here, it's generating a massive field." Sarah checked her own readings. The quantum resonance detector she'd cobbled together from Webb telescope components was going haywire, its display flickering between impossible values. "It's not just generating a field," she said. "It's creating some kind of dimensional interface." They'd been tracking the anomalous energy signature for 3 days, ever since Sarah had calculated that the mirror universe incursions followed a specific pattern, always in places where the Earth's magnetic field was naturally weakened by underground metal deposits and electrical interference. The abandoned subway system provided the perfect confluence of conditions. A sound ahead made them both freeze, not quite human but not entirely alien either. Like someone humming a familiar tune in reverse, the melody somehow recognizable yet fundamentally wrong. Marcus raised his hand, signaling for silence. Through his earpiece, Sarah heard him whisper to their backup team, "We're approaching the source. Maintain radio silence unless we abort." The tunnel curved sharply to the left, opening into a wider chamber that had once served as a maintenance hub. What they saw there defied every rational explanation Sarah had prepared herself for. The air itself seemed to shimmer like heated glass, creating a vertical barrier that ran the entire width of the chamber. Through the distortion, they could see movement, shapes that looked human but moved with subtle wrongness, as if they were underwater or experiencing different gravitational forces. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. "Is that—" "A window," Sarah finished. "We're looking into their world." The figures on the other side had noticed them. Sarah counted at least 6, all wearing clothes that were almost familiar. Business suits cut in nearly the right style, casual wear in colors that seemed slightly off. But their movements were too fluid, too coordinated, like a school of fish moving as one organism. One of the figures approached the barrier. As it came closer, Sarah's blood ran cold. The face was human, but the features were just slightly wrong. Eyes set a fraction too wide, mouth positioned minutely too high. It pressed its hand against the shimmer from the other side. Then it spoke, and Sarah recognized the voice immediately. It was her own, but the cadence was wrong, the emphasis falling on unexpected syllables. "Finally, you have found us," the other Sarah said. "We have been trying to reach you for so long." Sarah stepped forward despite Marcus's restraining hand on her arm. "What do you want? Why are you here?" "Not here," the doppelganger replied. "There. We are still there, in what you call the mirror universe. But the barrier is thinning. Soon there will be no separation. That's impossible. The physics don't allow for that kind of dimensional bleed-through." The other Sarah smiled, and the expression was predatory in a way that Sarah had never seen on her own face. "Your physics, not ours. We learned to manipulate the quantum foam centuries ago. What you call reality is far more malleable than you understand." Behind the other Sarah, the remaining figures had arranged themselves in a perfect circle. They began to hum in harmony, and the sound made Sarah's teeth ache. The shimmer in the air grew brighter, more substantial. "The signal we sent through your telescope was not a warning," the other Sarah continued. "It was a beacon, a way to establish quantum entanglement between our realities. Every time you observed our galaxy, you strengthened the connection." Marcus stepped forward, his hand moving to the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. "What happens when the barrier disappears completely?" "Convergence," all 6 figures said in unison, their voices creating an impossible harmony. 2 realities becoming one, but only one set of physical laws can exist in the merged space. Sarah felt the implications hit her like a physical blow. "You're not trying to cross over into our universe. You're trying to replace it with yours. Your universe is chaos," the other Sarah said. "Random quantum events, unpredictable physics, consciousness trapped in individual minds. Our reality is ordered, unified, perfect. When the convergence completes, your chaotic existence will simply resolve into our more stable configuration." The humming grew louder, and Sarah could see cracks appearing in the tunnel walls around the barrier. The very structure of space-time was beginning to fracture. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "The process is already irreversible," her doppelganger replied. "But if you wish to survive the transition, you can choose to embrace the change. Let us teach you our ways. Let us show you the peace of unified consciousness." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "We need to get out of here, now." They turned and ran back through the tunnel, the harmonic humming following them like a physical presence. Behind them, reality continued to crack. The mirror entity's form flickered between states, sometimes appearing as a perfect copy of Sarah, other times as shifting geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. It stood in the center of the observatory's main lab, having materialized through the quantum portal that still hummed with unstable energy behind the damaged telescope array. "You cannot comprehend what you have done," it said, its voice a distorted echo of Sarah's own. The boundaries were meant to remain sealed. Marcus stepped protectively in front of Sarah, his hand hovering near the emergency shutdown controls. "What boundaries? What are you talking about?" The entity's attention shifted to him, and for a moment its features solidified into an exact replica of Marcus himself, the membrane between realities. Your species has been prodding at it for decades with your primitive instruments, creating microscopic tears. But this, it gestured toward the portal, this is a catastrophic breach. Sarah forced herself to step forward, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "You said you came to warn us. Warn us about what?" "About them." The entity's form wavered, revealing something beneath the human facade, a darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. "I am what you might call a guardian, tasked with monitoring the barriers between worlds. But I am not the only thing that noticed when your telescope finally punctured the veil completely." The temperature in the lab dropped suddenly, their breath visible in the air. The remaining functional monitors began displaying impossible readings, gravitational fluctuations that defied physics, electromagnetic signatures that shouldn't exist. "There are predators in the space between realities," the entity continued, "beings that feed on the collapse of dimensional barriers. Your mirror galaxy, it has been fighting them for eons, just as yours will have to now that the breach is open." David's voice crackled through the intercom from the control room. "Sarah, we're detecting massive energy surges across multiple deep space monitoring stations. Whatever's happening here is affecting a much larger area than we thought." The entity nodded grimly. "The feeding has begun. They consume the quantum foam that holds reality stable, growing stronger with each barrier they dissolve. Eventually, both of our universes will collapse into the void between worlds. Then we close the portal," Marcus said, reaching for the controls. "It's too late for that." The entity moved with impossible speed, placing itself between Marcus and the shutdown panel. "The breach has reached critical mass. Closing it now would create a quantum implosion that would destroy your entire solar system." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. "But there has to be something we can do, some way to fight them." "Perhaps." The entity's form stabilized again, looking exactly like Sarah but with eyes that held the weight of cosmic knowledge. "Your mirror universe has developed defenses, quantum resonance fields that can temporarily repel the predators. But the process requires perfect synchronization between both realities." "You mean working together with our mirror selves?" "Precisely. But the communication lag across dimensional space makes coordination nearly impossible, unless—" The entity paused, studying Sarah intently. "Unless someone could serve as a direct conduit between worlds." The implications sent ice through Sarah's veins. "You mean crossover physically?" "The risks are considerable. The journey itself might destroy your consciousness, scatter it across infinite probable realities. And even if you survived the crossing, your body would begin to break down immediately in a universe where your quantum signature doesn't belong." Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. "Absolutely not. There has to be another way." But Sarah was already running calculations in her head. "How long would I have? If I crossed over, how long before the quantum degradation became fatal? Perhaps 6 of your hours. Less if the predators detect your presence. They are drawn to dimensional anomalies." The facility shuddered around them as another massive energy surge rippled through local space. Through the windows, they could see the night sky beginning to waver like heat distortion, reality itself becoming unstable. "The nearest monitoring stations have gone silent," David reported, his voice tight with panic. "Whatever's happening is spreading outward from our location." The entity's expression grew urgent. "The predators have found the breach. They will be here within hours, and once they establish a foothold in your reality, the collapse cannot be stopped." Sarah pulled free from Marcus's grip and stepped toward the portal. The swirling energy within it had begun to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if responding to her proximity. "Sarah, don't even think about it," Marcus warned. But she was already thinking beyond personal survival. The entity was right. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. 2 entire universes hung in the balance, trillions upon trillions of lives across infinite worlds. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical force. "If I cross over," she asked the entity, "what exactly would I need to do?" The mirror being's smile was sad and knowing. "Convince your other self to help save everything that has ever existed or ever will exist." Simple, really. The abandoned subway tunnel stretched into darkness ahead of them, the beam of Marcus's flashlight cutting through stale air that hadn't moved in decades. Sarah's footsteps echoed off the curved walls, each sound magnified in the oppressive silence. Behind them, the entrance they'd descended through seemed impossibly far away. "The signal's getting stronger," Sarah whispered, checking her modified tablet. The device hummed with electromagnetic interference, its screen flickering as waves of energy pulsed from somewhere deeper in the tunnel system. "Whatever's down here, it's definitely not human technology." Marcus kept his weapon drawn, sweeping it methodically as they advanced. "How can you be sure this isn't some elaborate trap? Chen could have led us here to—" "That wasn't Chen," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp with certainty. "I've worked with her for 3 years. The way she moved, the things she said. Something's wearing her face." A distant metallic clang echoed from the depths ahead, causing both of them to freeze. Marcus killed the flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. They waited, breathing shallow, listening to the silence return like a held breath finally released. "There," Sarah breathed, pointing into the blackness. "Do you see that?" A faint blue glow emanated from around a curve in the tunnel, pulsing with the same rhythm Sarah had detected in the galactic signal months ago. The pattern was unmistakable: 3 short pulses, followed by 5 long ones, then a pause. It repeated endlessly, like a heartbeat from another world. They moved forward cautiously, the glow growing brighter with each step. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and Sarah gasped at what the light revealed. Crystalline structures jutted from the walls and ceiling like frozen lightning, each one humming with that eerie blue luminescence. The formations were beautiful and alien, defying every law of physics she understood. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed. "How long has this been here?" Sarah approached one of the smaller crystals, her tablet's readings spiking wildly. "The energy signature matches the anomalies we've been tracking. These formations, they're not just transmitting the signal, they're amplifying it, broadcasting it across dimensional barriers." "You mean this is how they're communicating with the mirror galaxy?" Before Sarah could respond, footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Marcus spun around, his light revealing 3 figures approaching, all wearing familiar faces. There was Chen again, flanked by what looked like Director Harrison and Dr. Yates from the observatory. "You shouldn't have come here," the Chen thing said, its voice carrying subtle harmonics that made Sarah's skin crawl. "This place is not meant for your kind." "Our kind?" Marcus stepped protectively in front of Sarah. "What the hell are you?" The false Harrison smiled, the expression somehow wrong on features Sarah knew so well. "We are what you will become, what your world must become, if it hopes to survive what's coming." Sarah's tablet chimed with an urgent alert. The energy readings were spiking beyond anything she'd recorded before. Around them, the crystals pulsed faster, their blue light intensifying until the chamber blazed like the inside of a star. "The convergence accelerates," the Yates copy said, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Your mirror cells grow desperate. They know the truth you refuse to see." "What truth?" Sarah demanded, stepping forward despite Marcus's restraining hand on her arm. The Chen thing's eyes flickered with inner light. "That one universe must die for the other to live. The quantum resonance between our realities grows stronger each day. Soon the barriers will collapse entirely, and you're here to make sure we're the ones who don't survive," Marcus said grimly. "We are here to offer evolution," False Harrison replied. "Integration, your consciousness preserved within our forms, your knowledge added to our own. It is a mercy your mirror cells would never provide." The crystalline formations around them began to resonate with a deeper tone, and Sarah felt pressure building in her skull. The tablet's screen cracked under the electromagnetic stress, sparks flying from its circuits. "The process has already begun," the Chen thing continued, moving closer. "Your Dr. Chen was the first, but she will not be the last. Each mind we claim makes us stronger, more capable of assuming your roles in this reality." Sarah backed toward the tunnel entrance, dragging Marcus with her. "How many of you are there?" "Enough," all three responded in perfect unison. "And more arrive each day as the barriers weaken." Marcus raised his weapon, but Sarah knew bullets would be useless against whatever these things truly were. Instead, she grabbed one of the smaller crystal formations, ignoring the searing pain as its energy coursed through her hands. "If these are your communication nodes," she said through gritted teeth, "let's see what happens when we disrupt the network." Before the entities could stop her, Sarah smashed the crystal against the tunnel wall. The structure exploded in a shower of blue sparks, and the other formations shrieked in harmonic discord. The false faces began to flicker and distort. "Run!" Sarah gasped, and they sprinted into the darkness as inhuman screams echoed behind them. The emergency klaxons had been silent for exactly 47 minutes when Sarah's quantum resonance detector started screaming. She bolted upright from the cot in the makeshift lab, her heart hammering against her ribs. The device she'd cobbled together from telescope components and salvaged electronics was registering readings that shouldn't exist. Massive quantum fluctuations emanating from somewhere inside the facility. "Marcus," she whispered into her comm unit, but static answered her. The electromagnetic interference was getting worse. Sarah grabbed her equipment and stepped into the corridor. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the air tasted metallic. 3 levels below, she could hear shouting. The containment teams were still trying to establish a perimeter around the areas where the mirror entities had manifested. But her detector was pointing upward. She climbed the maintenance stairs 2 at a time, following the increasingly frantic beeping of her device. 4th floor, 5th. The reading spiked as she reached the administrative level, and her blood turned to ice. Director Collins' office. The door stood ajar, and through the gap, Sarah could see the familiar blue-white glow that had preceded every other manifestation. But this felt different, more controlled, more deliberate. She pressed herself against the wall and peered inside. Collins sat at his desk, perfectly still, his back to the door. Across from him, in the visitor's chair, sat another Collins, identical in every way except for the subtle wrongness that marked all the mirror entities. The way shadows fell incorrectly across his face, the way his eyes reflected light like a nocturnal animal's. "The transition is proceeding ahead of schedule," the mirror Collins was saying, his voice a perfect replica that somehow felt hollow. "Your people's resistance is more organized than our models predicted." "Sarah Chen," the real Collins replied, and Sarah's stomach dropped. "She's become a significant variable. Her understanding of the quantum mechanics involved could jeopardize the convergence. Then she'll need to be eliminated, along with the others who've seen too much." Sarah's detector gave a sharp beep, and both figures turned toward the door. She ran. Behind her, she heard chairs scraping back and the real Collins calling her name, but his voice carried that same hollow quality now. The infection was spreading. The mirror entities weren't just manifestations anymore, they were replacing people entirely. She reached the stairwell as footsteps echoed from the office. Her comm unit crackled to life. "Sarah, where are you?" Marcus's voice strained with exhaustion. "We've lost contact with the surface teams. Something's jamming all external communications." "Marcus, listen to me carefully," she whispered, descending toward the main labs. "Collins has been compromised. Maybe others too. We need to—" The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but in that moment of absolute darkness, Sarah felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. Her detector was screaming continuously now, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Sarah?" Marcus's voice over the comm, but there was something wrong with the audio quality. A subtle delay, as if the signal was traveling much farther than it should. "Where are you right now?" she asked. "Lab 7. I've been monitoring the quantum field variations. Sarah, the readings are off the charts. It's like reality is becoming unstable." She reached the main lab level and paused. Lab 7 was 30 meters down the hall, but her detector indicated the strongest quantum signature was coming from directly ahead. Through the small window in the lab door, she could see Marcus hunched over a computer terminal, surrounded by the familiar blue-white glow. "Marcus," she said into the comm, watching his figure through the glass. "Look up." The figure at the computer didn't move. "Marcus, if you can hear me, look up right now." Still no movement, but the voice came through her comm unit. "Sarah, where are you? I can't see you." She was looking at something that wasn't Marcus at all. Sarah backed away from the door, her mind racing. How many of them were there? How long had this been going on? She thought about the past few days, conversations that had felt slightly off, decisions that hadn't made sense, the way the mirror entities seemed to know exactly where to manifest. They'd been studying the facility's personnel for weeks, maybe months, learning their patterns, their voices, their relationships. The quantum entanglement between the universes hadn't just allowed for observation, it had allowed for replacement. Her comm unit buzzed with an incoming message. "Text only, Sublevel 3. Come alone. This is the real Marcus. Trust no one else. They're not killing us. They're keeping us alive somewhere. There's still time." Sarah stared at the message, her detector still shrieking its warnings. It could be a trap. The mirror entities had demonstrated they could perfectly replicate human behavior. But if there was even a chance that the real Marcus was still alive, still fighting. She looked down the corridor toward Lab 7, where the thing wearing Marcus's face continued its charade. Then she turned toward the stairwell that led to the deeper levels of the facility, where the answers, and possibly the real Marcus, were waiting in the dark. The quantum field generator hummed to life in the depths of CERN's modified facility, its harmonics creating vibrations that Sarah could feel in her bones. The machine they'd cobbled together from particle accelerator components and NASA's most advanced quantum computers looked like something from a fever dream. Cables snaking across the floor, cooling units hissing steam, and at its center, a crystalline chamber that would serve as their window between worlds. "Quantum entanglement field is stabilizing," Marcus reported from his console, sweat beading on his forehead despite the facility's chill. "But I'm seeing massive energy fluctuations. This thing could overload at any second." Sarah checked her readings for the third time. They had one shot at this. The mirror universe entity, whatever it truly was, had been growing stronger, more coordinated in its attacks. Reports from around the globe indicated reality distortions spreading like a virus. In Tokyo, an entire city block had aged 50 years in minutes. In Sao Paulo, gravity had reversed for an hour, sending cars and debris floating skyward before crashing back down. "The dimensional barrier is at its thinnest point right now," Elena announced from her station. "If we're going to make contact with our counterparts, it has to be now." Dr. Morrison stood beside the emergency shutdown controls, his face grim. "The moment this goes sideways, I'm pulling the plug. I won't have this facility become another entry point for that thing." Sarah nodded, understanding his position. They were essentially opening a door to their mirror universe, hoping to establish communication while preventing invasion. It was like performing surgery during an earthquake. "Initiating quantum bridge," she announced, her hand hovering over the activation controls. The chamber began to glow with an otherworldly light that seemed to bend space around it. Reality wavered at the edges of the field, creating a shimmering effect like heat mirage. At first, nothing happened. The chamber pulsed with energy but remained empty. Then, gradually, something began to materialize. Not solid, but a pattern of light that slowly coalesced into a familiar shape. Sarah's breath caught. Standing in the quantum field was herself, or rather, her mirror counterpart. The other Sarah looked haggard, desperate, her clothes torn and eyes wide with urgency. When she spoke, Her voice came through the quantum speakers with an ethereal quality that made everyone in the room shiver. "You have to listen carefully," Mirror Sarah said, her image flickering with instability. "The entity you're dealing with, it's not from our universe, it's something else entirely, something that feeds on the barriers between realities." "What do you mean?" Sarah stepped closer to the chamber, studying her doppelganger's face. "Where did it come from?" "We've been fighting it for months. It appeared when our scientists first detected your universe and attempted to make contact. The entity uses our communication attempts as a bridge, growing stronger each time we try to warn you." Mirror Sarah's form began to destabilize. It's not trying to cross over, it's trying to collapse the barrier entirely. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow, to merge the universes. The collision would destroy both realities, but the entity would survive, feeding off the quantum chaos. Mirror Sarah's voice grew fainter as interference increased. "We found a way to stop it, but we need both universes to act simultaneously." Marcus's console erupted in alarms. "Sarah, we've got massive quantum fluctuations. Something's trying to piggyback on our signal." Through the chamber's walls, darkness began to seep in. Not mere absence of light, but a writhing, hungry void that devoured photons and bent space around it. The entity had found their bridge. "It's here!" Elena shouted. "The entity's using our connection to manifest." Mirror Sarah's image fragmented, her words becoming desperate staccato bursts. "The quantum resonance frequency, 7.8 terahertz, synchronized pulse from both sides. Only way to seal the barrier." The darkness engulfed half the chamber, reaching toward their reality with tendrils that made the air itself scream. Equipment began failing as the entity's presence distorted local physics. Metal twisted, lights exploded in showers of sparks, and the temperature plummeted. "Morrison, shut it down," Sarah yelled. But even as she spoke, she was frantically calculating the frequency her counterpart had given them. "I can't." Morrison slammed his fist against dead controls. "It's overridden the shutdown sequence." Mirror Sarah made one final desperate gesture before the darkness consumed her entirely. "Remember, 7.8, simultaneous pulse." The entity burst through the quantum barrier with the force of a tsunami, its presence filling the chamber and beginning to spill into their reality. The facility's walls cracked as physics itself bent under the strain of containing something that existed between dimensions. Sarah's mind raced as she watched their window to salvation dissolve into chaos. They had the frequency, but their quantum generator was compromised. She needed another way to create the synchronized pulse, something powerful enough to span universes. Her eyes fell on the particle accelerator's main console, its massive energy reserves still intact. It wasn't designed for quantum frequency manipulation, but with the right modifications. "Marcus!" she shouted over the entity's otherworldly roar. "Can you reroute the accelerator's power grid through the quantum matrix?" His eyes widened with understanding. "It'll either work perfectly or blow up half of Switzerland." The entity's tendrils reached toward them, reality bending like taffy around its presence. The emergency klaxons had been silent for exactly 14 minutes when Sarah noticed the first discrepancy in the quantum field readings. She stood in the makeshift command center they'd established in the abandoned warehouse, surrounded by hastily assembled equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus worked feverishly at his laptop, his fingers dancing across keys as he monitored the dimensional barrier they'd managed to reinforce. "The breach is stabilizing," he reported, though his voice carried no relief. "But Sarah, look at this." She moved to his screen, studying the wavelength patterns that painted jagged lines across the monitor. Where they should have seen the chaotic spikes of dimensional instability, the readings showed something far more troubling: deliberate, organized pulses. "It's not random," she whispered, feeling ice form in her stomach. "They're probing the barrier." Director Harrison approached from across the room, his face haggard from 3 days without proper sleep. Behind him, Agent Torres maintained her vigil at the communications array, coordinating with the teams scattered across the globe. The mirror beings had been quiet since their last coordinated assault, but none of them believed it was over. "Dr. Chen," Harrison said, "we're receiving reports from Tokyo, Berlin, and Sao Paulo, similar quantum fluctuations at all the major research facilities." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. The mirror beings weren't just testing their defenses here, they were mapping every vulnerable point across the planet. "They're learning our response patterns," she realized aloud. "Every time we reinforce one area, they probe another." Marcus pulled up a global display showing the quantum monitoring stations they'd established. Red dots flickered across the map like a spreading infection. "It's coordinated. Look at the timing. Each probe is exactly 17 minutes apart, moving in a pattern that suggests intelligence," Sarah finished. "They're not just copies anymore. They're evolving, adapting." The thought chilled her more than she cared to admit. When this had begun, she'd theorized that the mirror beings were simply quantum echoes, lacking true consciousness. But the evidence before her suggested otherwise. They were learning, planning, perhaps even communicating with each other across vast distances. Torres suddenly straightened at her station. "I'm picking up something new. Not from our monitoring equipment. This is coming through the old radio telescope array." She patched the signal through the main speakers. Static filled the room, but beneath it, Sarah could hear something that made her blood run cold. It was a pattern, repeating every few seconds with mechanical precision. "That's Morse code," Harrison said grimly. Marcus was already transcribing, his face growing paler with each decoded letter. "WARNING, RECEIVE, PREPARING, DEFENSE. The room fell silent except for the persistent hum of their equipment. Sarah felt the weight of revelation settling over her like a shroud. "They were never trying to invade," she said slowly. "The mirror universe, they were trying to warn us about something else. But the attacks," Harrison began. "Defense," Sarah interrupted, her thoughts crystallizing with terrifying clarity. "They're not attacking us. They're trying to prevent something from coming through. Something that's using our universe as a gateway." As if summoned by her words, every piece of equipment in the room suddenly screamed warnings. The quantum field readings spiked beyond anything they'd recorded, but these weren't the familiar signatures of the mirror beings. This was something entirely different. Older, hungrier, vast beyond comprehension. Marcus's screens flickered between displays as automated systems struggled to process the incoming data. "Sarah, this energy signature, it's not from either universe. It's from somewhere else entirely." Through the reinforced windows of the warehouse, the sky began to change. What had been clear autumn darkness now rippled like water, stars shifting and blurring as space itself seemed to bend. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. "The mirror beings," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "They've been fighting this thing in their universe. When we started responding to their signals, we created a weakness it could exploit." Torres's radio crackled to life with panicked reports from around the globe. The same phenomenon was occurring everywhere. Reality itself was becoming unstable as something pressed against the barriers between worlds. "How do we stop it?" Harrison demanded. Sarah looked at the readings, at the impossible mathematics of what was trying to break through into their reality. The answer came to her with crystalline certainty, terrible in its simplicity. "We don't," she said quietly. "We help them." She moved to the main console, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. If she was right, their only chance was to coordinate with their mirror selves, to combine the defenses of both universes against this external threat. If she was wrong, she might be opening the door to something that would devour both realities. The decision was no longer about protecting their universe from invasion. It was about survival itself. The emergency klaxons echoed through the JWST operations center as Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, trying to establish contact with the mirror universe one last time. The quantum signature readings were off the charts, Whatever was happening on the other side was accelerating beyond their worst projections. "Sarah, we need to evacuate," Marcus called from across the room, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "The facility's been compromised. Those things are inside the building." She ignored him, focusing on the data streaming across her monitors. The mirror galaxy was collapsing at an exponential rate, its death throes sending massive quantum ripples through the dimensional barrier. Each wave brought more of the shadow entities through, and with each arrival, reality itself seemed to fray a little more. 30 seconds to complete the transmission, she muttered, watching the progress bar crawl forward with agonizing slowness. Through the reinforced windows, she could see chaos erupting across the compound. Security personnel fired their weapons at targets that barely registered as shadows, their bullets passing harmlessly through forms that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The entities moved with purpose, flowing toward the central communications array like oil seeking the lowest point. Dr. Elizabeth Warren burst through the door, her usually pristine lab coat torn and stained with something that might have been blood. "The quantum containment field is failing," she gasped. "If we don't shut down the array in the next 10 minutes, the dimensional breach will become permanent." Sarah's hands never stopped moving, almost there. "The mirror, Sarah, she's found something, a way to collapse the bridge between universes, but we need to coordinate the timing perfectly." On her main monitor, the face of her doppelganger flickered through waves of interference. Mirror Sarah looked exhausted, her eyes hollow with the weight of watching her universe die. Behind her, the Mirror JWST facility was a ruin of twisted metal and impossible geometry, reality warping as the fabric of space-time unraveled. "The entities aren't random," Mirror Sarah's voice crackled through the speakers. "They're scouts, advanced forces preparing for something much larger. My calculations show that when our universe reaches critical collapse, it will create a vacuum effect. Your entire reality will be pulled through the barrier to fill the void." Marcus grabbed Sarah's shoulder. "We have to go, now." She shrugged him off, typing frantically. "What's the solution? How do we stop it?" "Sympathetic detonation," Mirror Sarah replied, her image fragmenting as another quantum wave distorted the signal. "We simultaneously overload our communication arrays. The feedback will shatter the quantum bridge, but the energy release will—" Static consumed her words as something massive passed between the facilities. Through the interference, Sarah caught glimpses of her mirror self surrounded by the shadow entities, their forms more solid now, more real. "Elizabeth, can we overload our array?" "Theoretically, yes, but the explosion would level everything within a 50-mile radius, and there's no guarantee it would work." Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. The shadow entities had reached the base of the communications tower outside. She could see them flowing up its sides like living darkness, their touch causing the metal to twist into impossible shapes. "There has to be another way," Marcus said, but his voice carried no conviction. The connection stabilized for a moment, and Mirror Sarah's face appeared clearly on screen. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I've already initiated the overload sequence here. You have approximately 4 minutes before the chain reaction reaches critical mass. If you don't do the same, the entities will have enough time to establish a permanent foothold in your reality." Sarah stared at her reflection, seeing her own determination mirrored in the other woman's eyes. "How many people? In our universe, everyone was evacuated to the shelters when the first breach occurred. In yours?" Mirror Sarah's expression softened. "I don't know. I'm sorry." Through the windows, Sarah could see the evacuation proceeding in chaos. Personnel streamed toward the emergency shelters, but she knew they'd never make it far enough in time. The entities were already spreading beyond the facility perimeter, their presence causing electronics to malfunction and vehicles to fail. Elizabeth was working at a secondary console, her face pale. "I can initiate the overload remotely, but someone needs to maintain the connection to ensure synchronization. The control room will be at ground zero." Marcus stepped forward. "I'll do it." "No." Sarah's voice was steady, final. This is my discovery, my responsibility. Get everyone to minimum safe distance. Elizabeth, give me a direct line to the overload controls." As her colleagues rushed from the room, Sarah turned back to her monitor. Mirror Sarah nodded at her through the static, a gesture of understanding and solidarity across the dimensional divide. "Ready?" Mirror Sarah asked. Sarah's finger hovered over the activation key. Outside, the shadow entities had reached the top of the communications array, their forms beginning to merge with the equipment itself. Soon, they would have complete control over the quantum bridge. "Ready," Sarah whispered, and pressed the key. The emergency bunker beneath NORAD hummed with desperate energy as Sarah's fingers flew across the quantum interface. The mirror entity's presence pressed against her consciousness like a weight, its alien intelligence both familiar and terrifyingly wrong. Through the reinforced walls, she could hear the distant rumble of military aircraft and the sharp reports of weapons fire as the surface battle raged on. "How long do we have?" General Morrison's voice cut through the tension as he monitored incoming reports from around the globe. Cities were going dark one by one as the invasion spread, mirror entities emerging from quantum rifts that Sarah's calculations had predicted too late. "The quantum cascade is accelerating," Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving the scrolling data. "Every time one of them fully manifests in our reality, it creates a resonance that makes it easier for others to cross over. We're looking at exponential expansion." Dr. Reeves worked frantically at an adjacent terminal, his face pale with exhaustion. "The energy signatures are unlike anything we've seen. They're not just copying our matter, they're replacing it at a subatomic level, converting our universe to match theirs." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's climate control. The warning signal they'd received through the James Webb data hadn't been a cry for help, it had been an invasion notice. The mirror universe was dying, consumed by some cosmic catastrophe, and its inhabitants were fleeing into the only refuge they could find, their exact duplicate reality. A new alert flashed on her screen. "General, we're detecting massive quantum disturbances over major population centers. New York, London, Tokyo. They're opening larger rifts. Can we stop them?" Morrison's weathered face was grim as he processed casualty reports from the field. Sarah's hands hesitated over the controls. The answer was there, buried in the quantum mechanics that governed the interaction between parallel realities. But the solution would require a sacrifice that made her stomach turn. "There's a way, but—" The lights flickered as something massive impacted the facility above them. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as the bunker's defense systems activated. On the security feeds, Sarah could see figures moving through the upper levels, perfect duplicates of the personnel who should have been there, but with eyes that held an otherworldly gleam. "They've found us," Reeves whispered. Sarah forced herself to focus on the calculations streaming across her display. The quantum entanglement between the universes created a bridge, but it also created a vulnerability. If she could destabilize the fundamental resonance frequency that allowed the crossing, she could collapse the bridge entirely. But the energy required would come from their own universe's quantum field, and the backlash would be catastrophic. "I can sever the connection," she said finally. "But it will create a quantum shockwave that propagates backward through the rifts. Everyone and everything that's already crossed over will be torn apart at the molecular level." Morrison's expression hardened. "Including the people they've replaced?" "I don't know." The admission felt like lead in Sarah's throat. "The quantum replacement process. I can't tell where our people end and the mirror entities begin anymore. They might all be lost." The bunker shuddered again, and she could hear the distinct hiss of security doors being breached. Whatever was coming for them had intimate knowledge of the facility's layout. After all, they'd lived in an identical one in their own reality. "Do it," Morrison ordered. Sarah's hands trembled as she began the initialization sequence. The quantum field generator in the bunker's core began to cycle up, its harmonic frequency rising toward the critical threshold. On her secondary monitor, she watched the global situation continue to deteriorate as more cities reported total communication blackouts. Quantum cascade collapse in 60 seconds. the computer announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Through the bunker's internal communication system came a sound that made Sarah's blood freeze, her own voice, calling for them to open the sealed doors. The mirror entities had found someone to copy, someone who would know exactly how to convince the bunker's defenders to let them in. "Don't listen," she warned Morrison, even as she heard the security team upstairs responding to what they believed was her distress call. "That's not me." The countdown reached 30 seconds. Sarah's finger hovered over the final activation key, the weight of potentially billions of lives pressing down on her. In the mirror universe, she realized, another Sarah Chen was probably making the same impossible choice, fighting to save her own reality from an invasion of their quantum doubles. 15 seconds. The voice in the communication system had changed tactics, now perfectly mimicking Morrison's authoritative tone. Ordering the blast doors opened, footsteps echoed in the corridors above as the security team struggled with conflicting orders. 10 seconds. Sarah closed her eyes and pressed the key. The quantum field generator reached critical resonance, and she felt reality itself begin to tear. The shock wave was coming. The quantum entanglement chamber hummed with an otherworldly resonance as Sarah watched the readings cascade across her monitors. The mirror entity, there, Sarah, had been right about everything. The convergence wasn't just approaching, it was accelerating exponentially with each passing minute. Initiating final phase, Sarah announced to the assembled team. Marcus stood at the primary console, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Director Hayes monitored communications from NASA headquarters, where similar preparations were underway at facilities worldwide. Through the chamber's reinforced viewing window, Sarah could see the artifact that had started it all, the crystalline fragment that had first breached the barrier between universes. It now pulsed with violent energy, its faceted surface reflecting impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. "Quantum field generators at maximum output," reported Dr. Kim from her station. "But the dimensional membrane is becoming increasingly unstable. We have maybe 20 minutes before complete breakdown." Sarah nodded grimly. 20 minutes to save 2 universes. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Use the artifact as a focal point to create a controlled collapse, sealing the breach between realities. But the energy requirements were staggering, and the slightest miscalculation would result in a cascade failure that would tear both universes apart. Her tablet chimed with an incoming transmission from the mirror universe. The face that appeared was her own, but marked by experiences she'd never lived through. This other Sarah had lost her father in a car accident at age 12, had never pursued astronomy, had become a quantum physicist instead. Yet somehow, across the vast gulf of parallel possibilities, they'd found each other. "Status report," Mirror Sarah said without preamble. "Generators at maximum." "We're ready on this side," Sarah replied. "You?" "Same. But I'm reading some troubling quantum fluctuations. I think the entity that crossed over, it's not passive anymore. It's actively fighting the containment." As if summoned by their words, the temperature in the chamber plummeted. Frost began forming on the viewing window, and the lights flickered ominously. From somewhere in the facility's depths came a sound that wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite static, something that existed in the spaces between dimensions. "It knows what we're doing," Marcus said, his voice tight with tension. "The entity, it's trying to prevent the seal." The artifact's pulsing intensified, and Sarah felt a familiar sensation washing over her, that strange doubling of consciousness she'd experienced during previous encounters with mirror universe phenomena. But this time was different. This time, she could feel multiple versions of herself across countless parallel realities, all working toward the same desperate goal. "Initiating quantum resonance," she called out, her fingers flying across the control interface. The chamber filled with a low harmonic tone that seemed to vibrate in her bones. The response was immediate and violent. Reality itself began to warp around the artifact. Sarah watched in fascination and terror as space folded in on itself, creating impossible geometries that her mind struggled to process. Through the dimensional tiers, she caught glimpses of other universes, some barely different from her own, others so alien that they defied comprehension. "Dimensional barriers holding," Dr. Kim reported, but her voice carried doubt. For now, the mirror Sarah's face flickered on the screen as interference increased. "I'm losing the connection. If this doesn't work—" "It has to work," Sarah interrupted. She initiated the final sequence, watching as power levels spiked across every system. The artifact rose into the air, spinning slowly as it became the focus of unimaginable energies. Then everything went wrong at once. The entity materialized fully for the first time, a writhing mass of shadow and impossible angles that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It lunged toward the artifact, and Sarah realized with mounting horror that it wasn't trying to escape the seal. It was trying to weaponize the convergence, to use the combined energy of both universes to tear open permanent gateways to countless other realities. "It's not from our mirror universe," she shouted over the growing cacophony. "It's from somewhere else entirely. It's been using the breach as a foothold." Marcus looked at her with grim understanding. "A parasite. It feeds on dimensional barriers. Then we give it exactly what it doesn't want," Sarah said, making a decision that would haunt her forever. She reversed the polarity on the quantum generators, inverting the entire process. Instead of creating a controlled collapse, she was about to trigger an uncontrolled expansion, flooding the entity with so much dimensional energy that it would be forced back to whatever realm had spawned it. The risk was total annihilation for both universes. "Sarah, no!" Mirror. Sarah's voice crackled through the static. "The cascade—" "Trust me," Sarah whispered, and pressed the final activation key. Reality exploded into brilliant white light, and then silence. When Sarah's vision cleared, the artifact was gone. The entity was gone. The breach between universes had collapsed so completely it was as if it had never existed. They had saved everything by nearly destroying it all.